where are you? Alia.
How will the Home Secretary control the current immigration crisis, given that she perceives the asylum process as a merry-go-round?
Right, and of course the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was talking in response, in particular, she's complained about the asylum process before, but the Liverpool bomber, Ahmad al-Swayalmin, applied for asylum several times. His latest asylum was made in January 2021, and it was still under review. Nazir, do you want to kick us off on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, can I pay tribute to the taxi driver in Liverpool? He saved enormous numbers of lives. And to the emergency services, and then obviously we'll have to learn a great deal about what happened in this particular case. Your question really is about whether or not we should blame asylum seekers or immigrants for what that man did. I've prosecuted terrorists. I've never blamed a whole community or a whole faith or a whole city for what one criminal or two criminals.
I don't think that is the question, Nazir. I think the question is Charles, tell me if I'm wrong, but if your question is how will the Home Secretary control the current immigration crisis?
I'm coming to that, absolutely. Well, we apparently took back control a couple of years ago. And as a result of that, what we've done is we've lost the ability to send people back to the European Union. That was something we had when we were part of the European Union. So that's.
Do you want to explain how we've lost that?
There was an arrangement within the EU which said that if somebody arrives from another country, you can send them back to the EU. That was to try and level up the immigration that was happening, or asylum seekers were happening throughout Europe. We've lost that ability to do that.
I didn't know that. That's fucking hilarious. All the Brexiteers wanted to make sure they could send all of the Asians back, right? That was the Brexiteer position. Like, no, I say that's unfair because there was only a very small minority of Brexiteers, but there was definitely a portion who voted Brexit because they wanted to kick out the brown people, right? There was definitely at least some portion of them, and now they can't fucking do it. Oh dear, what a shame. That's a bit of a small chungus move, my dude.
Your bigger issue about the merry-go-round, because the Home Secretary actually said that lawyers are to blame. Now, I'm a lawyer, and I often blame lawyers, but this time I'm not going to blame them. What lawyers are doing is enforcing the rule of law. That's the most important thing in a democracy. And what they're saying is that if the government comply with the law in relation to a particular asylum seeker or whomever, that person can either be deported or given some kind of residence, whatever it may be. You cannot go around blaming lawyers for the fact that your laws are perhaps not up to date. You've been in power 11 years, Mims, so you can't keep saying that the laws are something wrong with the laws. And additionally, you can't say that lawyers are simply exploiting the system. All they're doing is providing services and supplies to the most vulnerable in our society. You need them, we all need them at some point in our lives. And it's important to recognise that. And in fact, when the Home Secretary criticised lawyers, as she did a few months ago on the same issue, there was suddenly an attack in North London on a law firm, which meant that people were being provoked to violence against lawyers for lawyers simply doing their job. As I said, I often criticise lawyers for what they're doing. In this particular situation, all they're doing is providing support, advice, guidance, and the government lose these appeals, which tells you there's something wrong with the way they apply the rules, not the fact that the lawyers are doing their job.
Jordan.
Yeah, well, it's a mistake in my estimation, speaking as a psychologist.
I'm glad you meant lawyers, not landlords, because I would heavily disagree with your previous point if that was the case.
To politicise such events too rapidly. I mean, this man targeted a woman's hospital. You have to have a lot of...
I mean, that's where he ended up. We don't actually know at the moment whether that was his target, whether it got diverted there, but that's certainly where the explosion happened.
We should be mindful there is investigations ongoing, and we should be mindful there could be legal process, if I may.
Okay, well, so I understand that that's the provisional hypothesis, but people who commit acts like that, especially when they're targeting innocent people, particularly when they're targeting innocent people who are already suffering, have a psychological tilt towards a malevolence that's so deep it's almost incomprehensible. And to phrase that in political terms primarily, I think is a mistake, partly because it doesn't specify the problem clearly enough, and it also risks the sort of entanglements that Nazir mentioned, which is the premature blaming of a political state or a group of people, a group of asylum seekers for that matter, for the actions of someone who's, to call it deranged, is barely to scratch the surface. And so the psychological explanations are more discomforting, I would say, than the political ones.
And in terms of the process itself, I mean, Charles's question about is how will the Home Secretary control the
I didn't even notice that he just kind of like went off on a tangent. It's like, well, actually, if you have a look at the psychological aspects of what's happened here, clearly there is some kind of it's very dangerous to have to think about the kind of psychological aspects of a person that would go and harm people who are already suffering. I'm like, well, yeah, that's nothing to do with the fucking question. Like, unless he's trying to avoid being all conservative about it. But I don't know. We'll continue. We'll see what happens.
Immigration crisis, that's how you're phrasing it, given that she perceives the process as a merry-go-round. You know, she
that
talks about far too many people coming here.
And you know, that's maybe, But maybe it's an excuse for this man to act out his pathological fantasies too. And I would certainly look there first as a psychologist.
Okay, woman there, yes.
Okay, if you have a look at the natural hierarchy of bombers to non-bombers, something I don't know. I can't talk about Jordan Peterson like making fun of his thing about hierarchy. That's the kind of feedback that I saw. Like apparently when they talk about the Azim Rafiq stuff later, apparently it gets a little bit more funny. But hey ho, again, he just said basically nothing there. I mean, I think his points in the first section were generally pretty good, saying that, well, sometimes you have to renege on promises as a politician, like when especially if you're in opposition. I mean, these obviously weren't in opposition this time. They probably should have known, based on being in power for however long, what their budgets theoretically could be, especially considering they made the promise during the pandemic itself, right? But I think his point that sometimes politicians can promise stuff that they then find out once they're in power they can't deliver due to whatever kind of myriad circumstances, I don't think that's unreasonable. I think it's reasonable for them to say, well, they can apologise for reneging on the promise that they'd made because they realised it was unfeasible, but then they've got to work out how to make it back to the public in that case, right? I think that's pretty fair.
Do you think the Home Office has enough resource to manage this?
Mint?
Well, first off, I would like to, obviously, we need to be very careful. There's ongoing investigations. We don't know the motivations, and we need to allow the police and all of the people linking into this to be able to do their work and make sure that any justice is able to be served. I think we need to split.
I mean, no one's been charged at the moment, so we're not under the laws of subjudice.
I know, but there is a lot of speculation, and we just have to, temper that until we know more. I think we need to be very careful about separating people who need genuine asylum, who need to be looked after and supported. I'm very proudly part of the DWP team working with Victoria Atkins, the Minister responsible for the settlement of people from Afghanistan. We're weekly working on that, and that's a very proud record that we have.
And do you agree with the Home Secretary that it's a merry-go-round?
Well, the economic migrant issue of people coming across the channel and actively trying to come into Britain illegally is very different. And the other point is that is actually gangmasters and people exploiting the most vulnerable people from around the globe who seem to think it's okay to then send them in small, perilous dinghies across for us to look after. And then it does throw in the question of resources and the fact that you can claim asylum in your first safe country, and that we absolutely need to be working around the globe where people are in peril and in need to keep them safe and support them that way. And the Secretary...
Yeah, sure, it's our government's politics to blame for the reason why there's such a fucking crisis. Like, I guess technically it's the government. It's not even the Tory government. It's an even older government than that. But like all of the kind of the destabilization in the Middle East, Asia, like whatever. That's all the fault of like foreign interventionism or incredibly poor country planning from previous generations. True is that, absolutely true. Tories are definitely the worst gang in this country. But to say there are other countries that are available, like we take so many fewer refugees and asylum seekers that other countries do. Like there are 11 million. Turkey are expected to take in 11 million Syrian refugees. Like was it like some like we're still in the 5 figures here, at the very least like the low 5 figures. So trying to make this comparison is ludicrous. Like sure, I get that there are going to be some kind of unscrupulous members of these groups. They're going to try and exploit this crisis. I get it. That's going to happen everywhere. It's not just in the UK that this happens, right? This is going to happen everywhere. And that's what the asylum process is for. Like, this person failed their asylum check. Maybe they should have been, jettisoned earlier on. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with how many appeals you can make before they can deport people. But because he'd failed like a huge number of asylum claims. So that's what the asylum process is for. Like, that's why people like fucking Sophie Corcoran on Twitter talking about how, there's a record number of migrant crossings. I'm like, well, there's a record number of refugees and asylum seekers because there's a lot of wars going on in the Middle East and Asia. Right? Yeah, 100% use that. You're absolutely right. So it seems very strange to me when people like Sophie Corcoran are saying this. Okay, sure. They come over here. We should be happy to do so. They are legally allowed to by international law, which we promised to uphold because we're part of the UN. Like, just get them over here if they're happy to come over here, whatever. Put them through the asylum process. If they fail the asylum process, then they can leave. Right? Simple as that. That's what the process is. Hey, thanks for the follow. It's that much appreciated. Yeah, exactly. Maybe if we didn't completely destabilize those regions of the world, maybe there wouldn't be so many refugees. Maybe if we'd thought about like the ethnic, like Pashto or Tajik populations of Afghanistan, for example, maybe there wouldn't be so much tensions in those regions, right? Maybe if we thought about that when we're drawing borders, but no, it's all Britain's fault at the end of the day, innit? I mean, to be fair, it's just general Western countries' fault, like France, like Italy, Belgium, USA, like all fucking to blame for this shit. But Afghanistan is definitely Britain's fault, and Syria is like a conglomeration of loads of different people's faults. Anyway, let's continue.
Worth bringing up COP26 in that context, because it seems to me that the best long-term solution to such problems is to try to make developed countries as rich as possible, and the best way to do that is not to control their pollution output in terms of, let's call it constraints, but to help them develop the cheapest energy as they can possibly manage as fast as they possibly can. I saw very little of that sort of idea coming out of COP26. So for long-term control of population movement, the only thing to do is to raise the living standards of people in developed countries.
That's the balance you have to strike. We've got a responsibility as COP president, as
this is the country that dropped the foreign aid budget. Like, I mean, literally everyone has to develop more clean energy as well. But actually, what John Peterson's saying here doesn't quite track as much. Because one thing that I noticed, there was an article I saw posted on Twitter, like a study showing that a lot of pollution is caused by immigrants moving from low polluting, like less well-developed countries, moving to industrialized, well-developed countries, and then as they're now part of the population, their kind of collective carbon footprint as an immigrant group is much higher than they would be had they not immigrated, right? So industrializing the other countries would increase the carbon footprint of people back home, but maybe if they were less likely to move, I don't know. It's a complex problem where you have to kind of balance up the risks on both sides. But I mean, generally, my kind of axiomatic beliefs on this issue should say that the borders are essentially kind of useless, and we should just let people move where they want. But I don't know how. Like, we've got to think of like the long term like risks and benefits analysis or whatever. If we're one of the greatest countries in the world, we're ever conceded we're not. If there's more refugees, should be absolutely welcome. If not, maybe we shouldn't be acting the worst way we do on the world stage. Yeah, true. Absolutely agree with that. Who's that? 100%. But clearly, every single country, all of the industrialized countries, needs to produce way more clean energy than we currently do. There needs to be like a concerted effort amongst all of like the COP leaders essentially to reduce their carbon emissions like drastically. Right? I would favour a move to nuclear. But to justify the changing of the power grid or whatever, or energy consumption, a lot of the less well-developed countries, they have to go through a lot of industrialization first that they just haven't gone through yet. Hey, thank you for the host there. Who's that? Much appreciated. So it's a real like complicated issue. Yeah, no shit, obviously. You know, the destruction of the planet is a big issue, right? But you've also got to admit that a lot of these immigrants are traveling, as we've obviously just covered beforehand. They're covering due to huge issues with regards to destruction of infrastructure through continued conflict. These are refugees fleeing a conflict, right, which the UK helped cause in most of the situations that are happening around the world right now. So at least in partially, there were myriad factors going on, but we certainly contributed in a harmful way. So clearly, we have to pay down that debt, especially since if you look at something like economic imperialism that goes on, the only reason why we have such a high standard of life, such a high level of industrialization, etc., is because of the amount of wealth that we managed to gain through imperial means, right? So the continued deprivation of countries in the global south is perpetuated continually by imperial pipelines of resource extraction that goes on to this day. That's why you get such a massive disparity in energy consumption and especially kind of carbon footprint between these countries. It's because all the industrialization that happened in the UK and in the global north happened at the expense of the global south through resource extraction, right? So we still have a debt to down pay in that regard as well. But like I think that the thing that we have the most knowledge about, which is going to produce the most energy that we need to maintain a modern economy, I think nuclear really is the only option. We should kind of supplement as much as we can with additional renewable stuff like wind, solar, tidal biomass fuel or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, I think the lion's share is going to have to come from nuclear. I don't see much. Like, we have to be pragmatic about these things. We can't just wait for fucking Elon Musk or whatever to develop some wild planet-saving, ecologically friendly, renewable energy source when we just we have nuclear right now, and we can deal with the waste problem later. But we need power right now, and we have to stop using fossil fuels immediately.
Bringing everyone to this really important agreement to see it delivered. But it cannot be at the expense of developing countries.
It absolutely 100% will be. And I don't think we have any moral right in the West at all to do that. I can't see it.
Language really matters in this debate. Now, we've heard Mims talk about economic migrants trying to cross the channel. The overwhelming majority of individuals who are going on these dinghies are going on these dinghies because they are fleeing something. They are fleeing conflict, they are fleeing drought, they are fleeing circumstances that none of us will ever experience. And the Home Office own figures show that that is what they are doing. So this argument that they're economic migrants is absurd. And the reason that they go on those dinghies is because of the government's policies, a hostile environment that they have created, the fact that they got rid of safe routes, the fact that they have turned a blind eye.
So what would the SNP do, Stephen?
It's this government.
Well, I'll tell you what they won't do. They won't give safe haven. Only one Scottish authority looks after the migrants through the voluntary dispersal team. Talking a good game, but not in reality.
I'll tell you exactly why only one Scottish local authority does that, because I happen to be a member of a Scottish local authority until a couple of years ago, and that is because the Home Office do not provide Scottish local authorities with the resources to do it, and they do not want to take part in this UK government's hostile approach to people who are seeking asylum in this country. Language matters. It's about time the UK government realised that.
Okay. So I'll come to you. Sorry.
That's pretty base, Jay. But he's entirely correct in that they are, vast majority of them are refugees or asylum seekers. They're not economic migrants at the end of the day. Right? We have to treat them with the level of compassion that we should show based upon the situation that they're in and how they came to be in that situation as well, considering the history that we've gone through already on this stream so far. So yeah, absolutely based. Love that take.
All right, were you in the glasses?
France is a safe country.
France is a safe country, you're saying?
If they're seeking asylum, why don't they seek it in France? Because it's a safe country.
And this again...
I mean, they're not required to by law.
Well, exactly. This is a common misconception that someone has to apply for asylum in the country that they go to. So, sir, I would simply say, if someone is fleeing Yemen and they go to one country and their family go to another, do they have to both claim asylum in different countries? Can those families not be reunited? That is the sort of policy that we should have, and the UK government's walked away from it.
The man here.
And also, like, if you're in Syria or you're in Yemen or you're in Afghanistan or whatever, the language that you are most likely to speak other than your own, like other than Pashto, other than Arabic, Syria. I don't know. I should. God fucking how unworldly am I that I don't know the language they speak in Syria or whatever. If the most likely language you're going to speak is English. And like the major English-speaking country that is a safe country, which is the closest on their route, is going to be the UK. Like, how many of them are watching French TV, but how many of them are engaging with popular UK media in which they can learn English, right? Common sense. Like, French obviously is going to be the next most likely language. It is one of them, like, out of the European languages, it's the second most popular in the world. Might be the most popular after English now, actually. Might be the most popular. But those are going to be the most, English is still going to be the most likely language they're going to learn, just because of the cultural influence that both English and American media has, which forces them to have to engage with it in English. And a lot of business is carried out on the international stage in English as well. So, and what are you going to do? Move to a country where you can't speak the fucking language? Get a grip.
Just to follow that point up, there's no drought or famine in France.
I think my point is being missed somewhat here.
Okay, let's hear the man in the white t-shirt here.
Thank you. I think Stephen was absolutely spot on. Language, it's such a powerful tool, and I think Priti Patel is almost treading dangerous waters with it in terms of how she's dividing different groups. I mean, if you're almost categorising, the asylum seekers as all as like committing terrorist activity, it just creates that divide between communities. I think with what Jordan was saying in terms of looking at the actual reasons, the psychological reasons for why they're doing these sorts of acts, I think that's the critical issue to look at first.
All right. Charles, you asked the question. You've had your hand up for quite some time.
Right. What I wanted to know is that, people come in Calais in France to come over here, and if France gives them the opportunity to come over here, then that would mean that France is not really a place where they want to be. So why would they want to come over to the UK and not live in France? And secondly, people coming over in Belarus, which will eventually affect Europe, would want to come to the United Kingdom. So would that one be considered as not a safe place for them?
All right, let me hear just from the man in front of you, yes.
I just want to touch on the point about the refugee crisis and the refugees rather than the asylum seekers, because most people seek to come to this country or to other countries in Europe out of desperation, mostly from the Middle East. And I have to say that I think we have a moral ethical responsibility towards these poor people, and very often these people are in the situation that they're in because of our misguided and ill thought out policy in the Middle East. Yep. We invaded Iraq without much thought as to what would happen afterwards. Our policy in Syria was wrong, and we have a situation where people are fleeing their countries where 10 or 15 years ago they were quite happy in their own countries. So I think we have a responsibility towards these people.
Stella.
I think very sadly the discussion we've had about immigration and asylum in this country for so long has been about heat, not light. Let me offer three very simple things. First and foremost, it is not illegal to claim asylum. Yep. And when you use language like genuine, when the Home Secretary starts conflating terrorism and asylum seeking, it is a very slippery path. It's not just socially divisive, it's very, very dangerous, because we undermine something I think we've all been proud of. Over the summer, when people saw what was happening in Afghanistan, we were horrified. And we as a country stood up and offered to help people. We offered to help families who were stuck with that horrific regime. So number one, asylum in itself, refugee seeking, is not an illegal thing to do. So don't talk about illegal when you don't know whether those people in those boats have a claim or not. Secondly, I don't want to take on Charles's point head on, the system is dysfunctional. Because I went and looked at the figures today thinking that this discussion might happen, right? There are 125,000 outstanding asylum claims in this country at the moment. A third of those people have not had any ruling at all from this government. Only 5%, just a small fraction of them, involve an appeal, involve the cases involving the lawyers. Frankly, the problem isn't the lawyers, it is the politicians. It's the fact that we haven't invested in having the system right. And
why is that, do you think? Why isn't the money devoted towards solving that problem?
Thirdly, because we've always tried to see if we can find somebody else to blame for this. If you've ever been to the refugee camps in Calais, you'll know why people do not want to stay there, the behaviour of the French police. But you'll also know that is our border. That is a deal we did. We have to separate out immigration. Anybody who's seen the empty supermarket phrases, seen the call for people to go and pick vegetables, seen the shortage of nurses, knows that we need a new immigration policy in this country, whip smart. But that is separate from those people who are fleeing persecution, whether it is the Taliban, whether it is the Omaro people in Tigray, the people in Africa, the people who need our help. The point when in the 1950s we signed that charter and said, if you are under persecution, you will find safe haven with us. Everyone on this panel opposes the people who are running the boats, the horrific gangmasters. But the things this government is doing is opening up a market for them. And you're right, John, I'm an MP.
But I don't understand if the argument you're making.
She is absolutely right. By making it harder, you make it easier for the unscrupulous people to then profit off of it. It's exactly what you see with the drug war as well. And the criminalization of drugs is what leads to the black market. If it was legal, you literally would not have a black market. If it was decriminalized, etc. And you see exactly the same here by making it so much more difficult for these people to get into the country in the first place by being so rigidly obsessed over policing the border. Then the gangmasters would not have a business to attend to, because they wouldn't have to be able to get people in through unscrupulous means. It's such a self-defeating policy, right? And I was going to say something and I completely forgot what I was going to say. But that was kind of the main. That was kind of the main thrust of the point that I was going to make. And oh yeah, I was going to make a point about Preeti Patel, in that essentially, as I've always said, I've said this so many times on stream now. This government does not care about policy. They do not care about the actual policies they're putting into place. They don't give a shit about the consequences. All they care about is the short-term optics of the policies that they're proposing. They will do whatever the public thinks is good to get them votes. Right? They're not ideologically focused like the Camerons or the Osbornes of the past. They are just completely cynical and reckless and will do whatever it takes to make votes. If they think that manufacturing a migrant outrage will push people away from Labour, which clearly Labour have swallowed the crack juice on, as that is what Keir Starmer was saying the other day, talking about that, the Tories have failed on keeping migrants out. What absolute fucking disgrace from Keir Starmer. Absolute disgrace, considering that a level of humanity towards refugees and migrants and asylum seekers was one of his pledges in to become Labour leader. One absolute disgrace and another pledge that he's gone back on. What an asshole, right? Clearly, the narrative that Priti Patel wants to spin about asylum seekers, migrants, and refugees has worked because they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They're high on the crack cocaine that she is putting out into the public discourse to dehumanize and to discredit the legitimate migrants, asylum seekers, and refugees that are coming into this country. So much so that she can get away with a policy that gives people immunity if they let them die at sea. The lives of these people are nothing to this government. It's all an optics game to win votes in elections. It's shameful. Absolutely shameful. 100%. It's despicable. And Priti Patel has just a black hole where a human heart should be. She's the most reprehensible politician I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. That's saying something. That's absolutely saying something. She is unironically evil. As Duma Media would put it, unironically evil as a person. She's despicable. Images of the dead children's bodies washing up on the coast, having drowned at sea, trying desperately to reach a safe haven on the shores of the UK, means nothing to her. They don't move her at all. And considering that she was the same person whose grandparents would be deported on her own immigration standards, what a pathetic waste shit stain of a human being Priti Patel is. She disgusts me. Exactly, you're absolutely right to use that. She would bring. I mean, I'm pretty sure she's in favour of the death penalty as well. Another inhumane practice. Poland and Belarus are doing a similar thing as well now, right? As far as I recall. Obviously, there's plenty wrong with Belarus at the moment outside of that, because Lukashenko is an absolute fucking mad lad. But hey ho.
Is that clear and that straightforward?
Yeah.
And this is actually costly not to do. What are the structural impediments to introducing such a policy?
I think it's an incredibly good question because I'm very mindful. I'm very mindful, for example, that we lock up women who are victims of rape and persecution in war in a place called Yarlswood in this country, when actually it would be cheaper and more cost-effective to have community resolution for them, because the vast majority of them, quite rightly, when their legal rights are looked into, are released.
Okay, well,
we are spending money on a system that doesn't work, dividing our country, dividing our communities, and trying to find people to blame rather than solutions. Heat, not light. It has to change.
Do you want to answer Jordan's question then?
Exactly. That's why they're happy to spend money on it. They're happy to spend money because they know that it's going to try and win them votes by continuing this anti-migrant, refugee, asylum seeker narrative that they're trying to push. They're going to push this culture war, trying to appeal to the racists. It's I hate it. And excellent for Stella Creasy talking about Jarl's Wood, because my God, the shit that went on there was absolutely despicable. Yeah, large big immigration removal centre. Controversies. There have been there have been a series of corroborated allegations of a sexual nature made against staff. The only witness to one was alleged was deported before she could be interviewed by police. Almost 90% of people held that Jarl's Woods are women. Approximately half the staff are male. The decision in November 2014 to give Serco, our best friends, £37 billion corporate bastards who are related to both the Tory party and Nicola Somers, these crooked people were given a £70 million 8-year contract to run the centre, was criticised by Natasha Walter of Women for Refugee Women. Serco is clearly unfit to manage a centre where vulnerable women are held, and it's unacceptable the government continues to entrust Serco with the safety of women who are survivors of sexual violence. The following month, Police and Crime Commissioner of the Thumbia Vera Baird expressed her support for an independent inquiry. In 2010, it was reported that children detained at Yarlswood faced extremely distressing conditions of treatment, and the High Court ruled the continued detention of children or failed asylum seekers at Yarlswood was unlawful. In September 2005, an asylum seeker from Angola hanged himself while in detention awaiting deportation with his 13-year-old son following a dawn raid at home. His needs. In 2014, a woman from Jamaica died at the centre from massive pulmonary thromboembolism. The family were only told of her death 8 hours later, and the investigation is underway into accusations that staff denied her medical assistance before her death. And in April 2015, a 33-year-old from India died of a heart attack. There have been 21. There's been hunger strikes. There was a fire. Inquiries into provisions. It's an absolute state. I'm so glad that Stella Creasy has brought this up, because it just shows the level to which that we essentially it's just like a modern day Guantanamo. I guess Guantanamo technically is modern day, but like a current day like a Guantanamo for refugees. What absolute shame! What shame! What embarrassment! The UK that this shit happens on our shores with our money that we pay for, which we pay for as taxpayers. That this shit happens on our watch. What an embarrassment!
I think we are doing our best with what we have in terms of resources. I think we genuinely
What do you think
are,
when you
because
look at, when you say
On the right, I mean, the rights are winning because they have the money to be able to manufacture the consent, right? Like, the vast majority of large media corporations are, obviously owned by right wingers because, if you are a millionaire, which you would have to be to own a large media conglomerate, billionaire as well in that case, people like Murdoch or whatever, then your existence, your primary existence, is to generate profit for your shareholders. So you have to create the media conditions and cultural conditions necessary for left-wing governments to get into power who might impact your level of generating profits. So you are incentivized in that regard to construct narratives that are the ways with which you can divide working class people away from class politics towards cultural issues, to make them forget about their new class consciousness and to play on the inherent white supremacy of European nations, to be able to use that culture war for essentially for profit, to distract people from voting for left-wing, progressive, social democratic governments and away and towards nationalistic, conservative governments who just happen to have right-wing policies that you maybe you don't support, but because they are all in on this cultural narrative of the bloody immigrants or whatever, then you feel like you can vote for them. Like most people are single-issue voters, and that's why manufactured consent is so powerful. Politically, the UK hasn't moved past the referendum. A political discussion at national level is still the same setup, and much of the right say whatever they like. Centrist arguments status quo, and the left get demonised and kept out of discussions, while the media just rides the David gravy train. Well, there's no left anymore, because Starmer's clearly said that. Well, she's clearly given up on that. Clearly given up on being the representation for anything even kind of remotely left wing. So that's what it is. But you're right, they haven't moved past the 2016 referendum. Honestly, if I'm going to blame anybody for not having gotten past the referendum, I'm going to blame fucking Remainers, the FEPE crowd, like the Remainiacs who will twist everything into being like some kind of like anti-Brexit stance rather than just like getting over it and realizing that it's done, it's gone. We're not going to be able to go back. Like, you can't can't turn it around again. How about we actually focus on proper class-based issues in a post-Brexit world, rather than continually moaning about something from 5 years ago and continually just like not getting with the times. But the reason why is because most of them are kind of fussy middle-class people who are all they're completely unaffected by a lot of the rightoid policy that happens, the Conservative government's been pushing, but they have some kind of emotional connection to the European Union as an entity. So regardless of whether things are going bad or good, and I would agree that they're going badly, and Brexit is partly to blame for that for multiple different reasons, for myriad reasons. I do not think Brexit's a good idea. But the fact that the Remainiac people are so obsessed with making everything a Brexit argument rather than actually looking at the real economic policies that we could do right now to solve climate change, to solve the wealth inequality, to fix the housing crisis, right? These are all things that need to happen. And Brexit or no Brexit, we can't just... That's not going to change the way we fix these policies and the pragmatic solutions that we need to take into effect to be able to make life better for working class people in this country. But all these kind of cosseted middle class people, where Brexit is the be all and end all of public policy, are destroying the discourse. They're absolutely destroying the discourse, and not to mention behaving in a classist manner as well. I see that far too often. But all these basically only stupid racists vote for Brexit when maybe it's not particularly nice of me to talk about these people having manufactured consent, not voting with their full for a particular referendum or a particular party being fully cognizant of the thing that they're voting for. But I don't think it is unrealistic of me to say that most people don't really engage with politics on a particularly fundamental level. Most people are, when they're looking at politics, it's through single issues that affect them. Like, you saw how the Tory polling was basically, really quite far up high until we saw things like the change to triple lock pension, change to national insurance, and then they start dipping in the polls. Like, it doesn't matter how many people die of coronavirus because that doesn't really affect you. But as soon as it starts hitting you in your own pocketbook with regards to triple lock, with regards to like in the national insurance, and then suddenly people then once you realise that politics has a genuine like material impact on your own life and your own standard of living, suddenly they get involved. Say, oh, maybe this Conservative government aren't as good as we once thought they were, right? So it's super fucking complicated to think about the way people vote the way they do. But like that's my Romaniac rant about the way in which they just kind of obfuscate the real issues at hand and just stymie any kind of productive discussion by always like moving things back to Brexit in specific. And you're absolutely right that nobody's moved past that. Which is why that's why I just like I know that it's frustrating to have to let the Brexiteers just have like some kind of like satisfying victory or whatever. That's I don't get that it feels bad, but dwelling on this issue, it does not have any kind of like pragmatic political application. It's not going to get us anywhere if all we do is just moan about what Brexit has done. Rather than think, well, okay, well these things are bad are happening, but we can take steps moving forward to make things better for the issues that genuinely matter a lot more than whether or not we're in the European Union or not at the end of the day.
Hang on, stop just for a second. When you say that, there's a ripple of laughter through the room. What do you think of that response?
Well, obviously people are frustrated, and I get people writing to me in my constituency postbag every day who want to understand, exactly as Stella has said, what is the genuine needs that people have, and where is this economic migration, and where is it pure exploitation?
And what Jordan's asking, what's the impediment to sorting it out, to getting a system?
I understand it's not simple.
Exactly. First off, it's not simple. First off, there are reasons that people only feel that they want to come to the UK, which is, as you described earlier, that we need to make sure, and the gentleman over there said, that we need to make sure that their homelands and their lives feel safe and feel prosperous.
International development aid then, is it?
Well, I would...
Because the consequences of that will be that people will seek to go
elsewhere. I wouldn't mind being questioned if you were doing your bit in Scotland.
Is that why you've not delivered upon, well, your part of the problem?
It's just, as soon as he criticised her, correctly I might add, right, but making the point that we were making in that the removal of international aid, the consequences of British foreign policy, is the reason why we have a lot of refugees, migrants and asylum seekers in this country, from the Middle East, from Central Asia, etc., right? He clearly identified a key failure of Conservative Party policy, and her immediate response is just, well, I don't see you in Scotland doing anything. Well, tough shit, right? Maybe they can do better, but we're talking about you and your government, the people in Westminster with the vast majority of the power with regards to this issue, right? Like, it's such a, like, Conservatives do it all the time. No points, no arguments, just vaguely gesture at some kind of imagined hypocrisy. I hate it. It drives me around the bend.
Promise for £100 billion towards developing countries so they can combat climate change, because the consequence will be that those individuals will have to flee drought and they will come to Europe and they will come to the UK. Is that why your government has done none of those things?
So your government is not looking after and doing its fair share of people coming to these shores. And at the moment we are looking... At the moment we're even looking to try and do the fair share around the Afghanistan resettlement, which is going brilliantly well. I'm very proud of DWP on the ground in the bridging hotels.
More than our fair share. We took 10% of the UK's Syrian refugees.
We're learning from the Syrian resettlement scheme has worked brilliantly. And in fact, as Stella was saying earlier, we've got employers coming forward who are really keen to work with migrants, who are really keen to help people to, settle and give them that better life. But what we do need to do is stop those gangmasters who are taking £15,000 life savings off people, who are taking Paris trips.
They exist because of your fucking stupid policies. Change the policies and they'll go, right? Make it easier to claim asylum or to seek refugee status or migrate to the UK, and they will stop. They'll fucking stop, right? They prey on the fact that you make it so bloody difficult, that you remove so many avenues, that people have to go through these, through the illegitimate means to do it, and they prey on that. It's such an easy thing to grasp, and Conservatives won't do it because they don't care about consequences. It's this fucking deontological bullshit where they say oh, well, we can't be seen to be being permissive of X, Y, Z. Well, if we legalise drugs, we'll be seen to be permissive, and we have this moral obligation to show that this is bad by making it illegal. Well, if making it illegal doesn't change how many people are doing drugs, keep people away from seeking addiction counselling for their addiction, and puts power into the monies of the black market people who are selling this without taxation and cutting it with awful shit that makes the supply worse, puts money into the hands of criminals that you create with these stupid policies, then just decriminalise it and it'll go away. It'll just go away, I promise you.
day in, day out, across to these
Okay.
shores.
You've made that point.
But it's so
And you
important.
No, I know,
pass
just
a
we-
law
we-
making it okay if somebody drowns in a boat and we don't blame people and hold them accountable. So don't tell me that this government cares about these people, because most of the people on those boats are from Afghanistan. So if you are trying to pass a law that means that we don't hold people to account for whether they've tried to save somebody, rather than looking at safe passage legislation, we're one of the few nations that doesn't allow families to reunite. I've got constituents who've got family members in other countries who could look after them, but we won't let them come here to be able to do that. It's more cost effective and it's more humane. It is a dysfunctional system, but at the heart of it is a disrespect for other human beings, and all of us are stained by it as a country.
I don't think that's true.
I'm going to move on.
Well done, Stella. I disagree with Stella Creasy on plenty of things, but that was absolutely fucking correct.